Amanda Robinson was born and raised in a small town in South Carolina. She had long become accustomed to the privileges and the respect she received for being the judge's daughter. But that didn't mean that the young woman was arrogant. On the contrary, she was always ready to lend a helping hand to those in need. As for her personal traits, Amanda must have taken after her mother, who died 7 years earlier. When she was alive, Rosemary Robinson was known as a kind and sympathetic person who understood the value of friendship and always cared deeply for people in her life. Her colleagues and numerous acquaintances loved and respected the brown-haired woman, whose eyes literally radiated happiness and love. Unfortunately, cancer doesn't play favorites, and no matter how hard Marlon Robinson tried to save his wife, no matter what clinics he took her to, there was no saving her. It turned out that Rosemary had been ignoring her alarming symptoms far too long, before eventually going to the doctor. The day her mother passed away, Amanda saw her father cry for the first time in years. Marlon Robinson was used to ruling on other people's fates in the courtroom, but now that he was facing his own grief, he was unable to accept his wife's death. At first, many of the judge's colleagues thought that he would eventually move on and find himself a new partner. But to everyone's surprise, it turned out that Marlon Robinson could only love one woman. And for 7 long years, he continued to hold on to his love, staying faithful to his late wife. Instead of focusing on his own life, the judge devoted himself to raising his daughter, whom he loved more than anything else in the world. Amanda was no longer the green-eyed teenage girl she was when her mother passed away. Now, at 22 years old, the young woman had blossomed into a real beauty who made people on the street turn their heads, especially the men. Sweetheart, I think it's time for you to start thinking about marriage. Remember what your mother always used to say? It's important that a woman marries young, just like she did. Marlon Robinson said, smiling. Yes, Dad, I remember. But I think I still have enough time to sort out my personal life. Amanda replied as gently as possible. Marlon Robinson chuckled understandingly, and then added, You better, darling. Do as you please. Just remember that I can always find a couple of nice young men for you to meet. Come on, Dad. I know all about your nice young men. They're all sons of congressmen who can't even take a step without their parents' approval, and yet they think they're ready to get married. Amanda retorted, hinting to her father that she didn't like this conversation and it was time to end it. It turned out that the young woman was planning on visiting a friend in a neighboring city in the afternoon, so she wanted to take a shower and get ready for her trip. Amanda was in a good mood, and about an hour later, she carefully backed her Chevrolet out of the garage and headed towards the bypass. She wanted to save time on her commute. The road ran through a rather picturesque area, surrounded by forests and dense vegetation on all sides. There was hardly any traffic at all, so Amanda hit the gas confidently and listened to the growing hum of the engine. Taking occasional glances in the rearview mirror, the young woman quietly sang some simple song that she just made up. Suddenly, Amanda saw something strange several hundred feet in front of her. At first, she thought it was just an optical illusion, but as she got closer, she realized it was definitely real. There was a naked man on the side of the road and gazing imploringly into her eyes. It turned out that the stranger wasn't actually completely naked. He did have some underwear on. Amanda was so shocked by what she saw that she inadvertently stepped on the brakes. In less than a second, her Chevy stopped dead in its tracks. Trembling with anxiety, Amanda flung open the passenger door and gestured for the stranger to get in. The man looked at her with clear uncertainty, as if doubting if he could trust her. Well, are you just going to stand there all day staring at me? Come on, get in. You can tell me all about it in the car, Amanda said, letting the stranger know that she wasn't kidding. The man didn't wait to be asked a third time and jumped into the heated interior of the Chevrolet. Without saying a word, Amanda took off, unsure about where to go next. She was surprised when the stranger was the first one to break the silence. My name is Francis Turner. Thanks for picking me up back there. But I want to let you know right off the bat, I'm a deserter, okay? I ran away from the Marine Corps on Parris Island. Ever heard of it? The man asked, stammering on every word. Of course I've heard of it. Everyone in South Carolina knows that place. It's a training camp for recruits, right? Amanda asked, raising her eyebrows in surprise. The young man turned red and lowered his eyes in shame. He mustered up his courage and said, "Yeah, you're right. But I had to abandon my unit and get out of there. I had problems with some of the instructors hazing the new recruits." Francis replied timidly, ashamed of his own words. As she looked at the exhausted, scraped, and bruised young man, Amanda felt genuinely sorry for him. Given his reasons, Amanda didn't feel that Francis was a deserter at all. He just found himself in a rather tricky situation and couldn't find another way out. So Amanda turned her Chevy around and drove back to her house. Noticing the frightened look on the passenger's face, she smiled reassuringly and said, "Don't worry, I'm taking you to my place. Trust me, no one's going to look for you in the judge's house." "A judge's house?" Francis asked nervously. "Yeah, my dad's a judge, but don't worry about it. He's a good person, and he would never do wrong by an innocent man," Amanda added, which made her travel companion unspeakably happy. Francis's eyes spoke louder than any words could. He was clearly having a hard time with the situation he found himself in. On their way to Amanda's house, the young man told her that he grew up without a father and enlisted in the Marine Corps to help his mother. Unfortunately, he couldn't have known that he'd end up serving under the command of a sergeant who disliked the headstrong recruit from day one. The instructor humiliated Francis any chance he got and any way he could, referring to him mostly as a dumb redneck because the young man had grown up in the country. There came a point when the recruit simply couldn't take the bullying anymore, so he plucked up his courage and abandoned his post. While on the run, Francis found himself at a river that he had to cross. Francis took off his clothes and held them high above his head as he crossed the river, but unfortunately, the man was unable to hold on to them. That's how he ended up on the side of the road in his underwear. This was Francis's third time on the run, and what he feared the most was getting caught. He wanted to get to the city as soon as possible, so he could get to the media and make a statement. Watching the determined runaway recruit, Amanda realized that she was feeling tremendous respect for the young man, who didn't fear for his own future, but was rather willing to risk it to prevent any more hazing at the Marine Corps training camp. Amanda knew that her father could spend days at a time at court hearings and trials, so she wasn't worried for Francis, who needed to rest and recover. She gave Francis some of her father's clothes to put on after his bath. They were a little too big for him, but he still looked pretty good. She then made a meal for her guest and escorted him to the back room where he could rest and sleep. Unfortunately, Amanda had no idea that her father decided to surprise her by coming home earlier that day. You can imagine Marlon Robinson's surprise when he saw a strange man in his house wearing his own clothes. "What's going on here, honey? Is this your—" The judge stammered. "Yeah, Dad, this is my fiancée, Frances," Amanda said without batting an eye. Standing next to her, the young man turned pale and lowered his eyes. Then, mustering up his courage, Francis took a step forward and said, "My apologies, sir. I'm afraid the truth isn't what your daughter just told you. You see, I'm actually a military deserter." And now Mr. Robinson was even more surprised. "Wow. Honestly, Amanda, I didn't expect this from you. What will my colleagues think of me now? How do you expect me to explain why my daughter is harboring a runaway recruit?" the angry father exclaimed. In response, Francis Turner started passionately describing the inhumane treatment he was subjected to at the Marine Corps training camp. Nevertheless, the young man didn't hold all of his military superiors responsible. He was well aware that not everyone at the base knew what his sadistic instructor had been doing. After hearing out the Marine defector, Marlon Robinson thought for a moment, and then, to the surprise of all of those present, offered his help. The judge clearly sympathized with Francis and the predicament he got himself into. Marlon Robinson reassured the young man and promised to arrange a press conference for him with the local news station. The judge was a man of his word And so the very next morning, Frances gave a shocking interview to the journalists. The state military prosecutor's office soon launched an investigation that resulted in the discharge of the guilty drill sergeant from the Marine Corps. Thanks to Frances, many of the other soldiers were able to breathe a sigh of relief, while their mothers were sincerely grateful to the young man who had sacrificed his own career to protect other recruits from mistreatment. The other men in his unit knew that Frances was no coward and wouldn't have abandoned his post out of fear or weakness. However, the happiest of all those involved in the story was probably Amanda, who had helped the runaway recruit expose the truth and receive recognition for it. After all they had been through together, the young people started dating, much to Marlon Robinson's delight. Frances, who had learned to believe in the power of the law, is now planning to study it and dreams of becoming a human rights activist one day. The former Marine is also thinking about proposing to Amanda, whom he'd fallen in love with from the moment they met on the side of the road that fateful day. By the way, Marlon Robinson is very supportive of Frances's plan and would love to see this man with great potential as his son-in-law.